Hello and welcome to the season finale for the Redcast Season 1. I'm your host Troy, also known online as Red Archer Live, and welcome to the concluding episode of the show all about exploring the world of entertainment through music, acting, content creation, video games, and much, much more. This one, however, is going to be a little bit different, as to round off the season, I'm going to look back on the creation and progression of the show, sharing some behind-the-scenes information as we go, and also talking a bit about my favourite episodes and moments of the show this year. But this time, it's just me, I'm on my own, I haven't got a guest, so if you don't like the sound of my voice, then you're going to be in for a rude awakening, and for that, I can only apologise. But either way, as always, and as was the case throughout this series, this episode was available 48 hours early for my patrons before the public release on YouTube and Spotify, as well as previously announced, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Google Podcasts, the 3 new platforms you can listen to the podcast on. But if you'd like to become a patron and get 2 days early access to episodes for the Redcast Season 2 in 2021, then head over to www.patreon.com/RedArcherLive and pledge as little as £1. And right before we get started, it's time to read out this season's final featured review, which comes from Catpunk, who wrote, "I always enjoy this podcast and look forward to Season 2 of it, and more info on Payday 3 in the future when they are able to share. Hopefully Dallas, Hoxton, Chains, Houston, and Sokol can come back. Would miss the boys if they weren't added." So thank you, Catpunk, so much for that review. As to everyone who commented on all 9 episodes of the show to let me know your thoughts about every guest I brought on every episode, just shared your general thoughts and everything, it truly meant the world to me to see the amount of comments I got. And this time, I'd ask that you comment your favourite moments from this season. Which bits did you enjoy the most? Which were your favourite episodes? Who would you like to see in Redcast Season 2? Let me know all of this down in the comment section below, and I'll pick out some featured reviews of the podcast from this first season to read out as we open Season 2, as I've said, next year. But either way, it's time to get into the podcast, talk about my favourite moments of the show, share some behind-the-scenes information, and all that good stuff. I have no idea how long this episode's going to be, just for general reference, because I'm literally sat here talking to myself. I don't have another guest to bounce off. I've never done this before. Talking to myself for this long for a video or for a podcast is new to me, so bear with me. We'll see how long we go for, but I just want to talk a little bit about all the episodes, as I've said. So let's start off, first off, by talking about the creation of the podcast. Now, to me personally, I've wanted to do a podcast for a very, very long time, and I said this, I think, in one of my previous episodes, or maybe a couple of them, I don't know. But 2020 has been a very weird year for a lot of us. I don't need to explain why. I think we're all fairly up to speed on what's been going on there, but even before 2020, in 2019, even 2018, to be honest with you, I'd hear my friends saying, "Oh, I'd love to make a podcast. I listen to this podcast on Spotify or on YouTube, and I like listening to this person talk about the things they're interested in, or the guests they bring on, blah, 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 blah." There's been some really popular podcasts as well. The Joe Rogan podcast is one that is absolutely huge and massive and just fantastic. The amount of guests they bring on, the amount of influence it gets, and you've got so many other people that make podcasts. I mean, the podcast genre has expanded so much over the last decade. It is ridiculous that everybody and their dog has either got or listened to a podcast at some point in their life, right? And to me, every time I heard about it, I thought, "Oh, a podcast sounds cool. That'd be something that'd be cool to be a part of, to actually organise something like that, or just to be a guest on a show, to talk to somebody else about your life or find out about their life and interests and things." That always seems interesting to me, and I think that probably stems from the fact that I'm a big fan of chat shows. I love watching these things because you get to see what people are like. If it's actors, see what they're like off screen. If it's musicians, get to know the person behind the music. I think that element of it is just fascinating, to get to know a person well, but also, especially because I'm a big fan personally of the Graham Norton Show. If you're in the UK, you'll probably have heard of the show. If you're abroad, you may have done. I'm pretty sure it's broadcast in America at times. But that show to me is my favourite purely because it's far more informal. All the guests are on at the same time. They're all talking about stuff way beyond what they're brought on for, be it a film or an album or whatever. They're there to just chat about anything, and I loved that atmosphere. And I think personally for me, that was a good bit of inspiration for the construction of the podcast. I think having that same kind of vibe of, you want to ask them some questions, but you also just want to have a chat, You want to know how the person's doing. You don't just want to know what they're famous for and try and get into details about, "Oh, how did it feel to do this? How did it feel to do that?" But know a bit beyond that, get to know them on a more personal level. And I thought that was definitely a point of inspiration. But as I said, it took me a long time to get to the point where I thought, you know what? I can do this. I could make a podcast. I could sit here. I could talk to people and, try and entertain people. I mean, by this point, I've been doing YouTube for 6 years. And I mean, it's fair to say that over that progression of my YouTube channel, I've had some pretty bad videos, some pretty big stinkers, and some memed ones. As we know, Bank Heist 101 is one in particular that I don't seem to be able to escape anymore. And you know what? It's all in good fun. I mean, I find it personally quite enjoyable to look back on the bad things I've made and go, "Do you know what? Bit of a laugh, it's part of your history, and as long as you've improved from it," because, my God, that did need improvement, but it's been a blast, to look over the progression of things and how I've evolved as a person. I've always said, especially on the YouTube side of things, that it became such a big part of my personality. I think it helped me find my footing with my confidence and also public speaking skills, because I did public speaking a bit in high school as well, and I think also being able to talk to a camera, and especially now doing live streams, everything's in real time, I think being able to talk publicly has been something I've definitely gotten better at. And I think as time passed, as I said, I just kind of got to the point where I thought, do you know what? I've done some of these interviews with payday actors. I'd spoken to Damion Poitier at the end of 2018. I'd spoken to Ian Russell in 2019, and some other payday actors beyond that. It's been such an eye-opening experience being able to chat to these different people, have some good times, get to know people that my fans and my friends, everyone looks up to or finds cool or whatever. Being able to actually reach out to them and say, hey, do you want to chat to me for a bit? Do you want to have a good time? You know, like, actually, well, I wouldn't say to them, do you want to have a good time? That sounds sketchy, but you get the point. But saying to them, you know, do you want to sit down, chat to me about your work, things beyond that? Basically have a bit of banter between each other, you know, have a nice chill conversation. And to be able to bring different people on from all different walks of life and have them talk to me was a very, very strange experience. And so in 2020, you know, we've all had the lockdown. I mean, most countries have, not different countries have obviously responded to COVID in different ways. But for us personally, we had a massive lockdown in the early to mid part of the year. It weaned off a bit in August when I started off, but then it all just fired up again. And to be honest, since August, I've pretty much been at home the whole time. I know that a lot of the time where I live, the lockdown has not been imposed and we've been able to go out and do things, but the virus just kept spiking and getting worse. And I just personally, for the sake of my own health, my mum's health, and the people around me, I didn't see the point in going out. I figured I'd just, you know, stay home, work on the YouTube channel, the Twitch page, as I've now gone to move on to. And I thought, you know what? I've been talking about doing a podcast for so long. Let's make it. You know, let's sit back, let's get this podcast set up, and let's bring some guests on. And of course, even at the point when I set it up, the same fears went around in my head of, can you keep all these guests on? Can you manage to bring enough people on to sustain a show? Can you be, as bad as it sounds, can you be entertaining enough? You know, it doesn't matter who you bring on. If you're boring as all hell talking to these people trying to get to know stuff about them, no one's going to listen. No one's going to care, right? No one is going to care in the slightest about what you do if you aren't entertaining enough to at least sustain the show, let alone to make it good. 2020 is the year where we've all been at home. We've all been forced to reevaluate our own lives and the things we like and the things we do. And I thought, I've been sat at home and I struggled for a long time, for a good few months this year, of finding things to do to keep myself busy, right? And I think a lot of us can relate to that. We all had some pretty dark times where we kind of thought, you know, I don't get to see my friends, don't get to do this, don't get to do that. And I thought, right, here's something that I could really put my time into. I could give it my absolute all, have some social interaction, and finally make something out of a dream I've wanted to do for a while. And I thought, right, let's make the podcast. Let's just do it. Let's not overthink it too much. Let's get right into it, make a podcast show and see what people think. And what did I do? I then immediately began to overthink it because the name, my God, I cannot tell you how long I spent thinking about a name for this show. And the Redcast is so simple. I mean, you might think that just I came up with that idea in 5 minutes. No, I didn't. Honestly, to me, making the name of the podcast was the most important thing. It's super vital. If you don't have a name that stands out, then you may as well not bother, because your name's got to stand out. If it doesn't sound snappy enough, people aren't interested, they can't be bothered to click on it. It's all about making impressions on people, especially in today's climate of YouTube videos and Twitch live streams. If you aren't attracting people from that very first title, that very first thumbnail, no one cares, right? This industry is very, very oversaturated, perhaps horrifically so. There are so many people trying to do different things that trying to find anyone you want can be so difficult because there's so many different names flying around now. And so, to me, I wanted to make sure that my podcast name stood out. I wanted to make sure that it was unique and just kind of summed me up and was quite simple, right? And the Redcast, I absolutely love. I think it's a great name because it's got podcast in the name with a dash of my actual name in it, the Redcast. Perfect. Red Archer Live podcast done. Nice and easy. That took far longer than you'd imagine. I had several ideas flying around in my head. I was thinking of the Safe House podcast for a bit, which some of you may now go, oh, that's a much better name, Troy. Yeah, I kind of get that, but my idea with this podcast, as you will have seen, was that while I wanted to have a good amount of payday guests, I did want to have it to be not just payday. I didn't want to just have payday themed guests on and let that be it. There were other people I wanted to speak to beyond the payday stratosphere that I thought would be interesting to bring on the show. And would people be as interested in those? Generally, maybe not, right? But the idea was that I wanted to talk to people from all different walks of life. And if I limited the podcast to immediately just payday 2 people, then I'm already failing in that goal. I think that makes sense. I hope that makes sense from where I'm trying to explain it. But the idea there was, you know, the Safe House is very good. Nothing payday themed. Keep it more on brands to my name and don't relate it to payday. The other idea I had was for the Red Room. I've talked about this before on live streams and I think in my Discord a bit. But I said that name to a few people and a couple came back with an idea as to why that might not be the best name. If you don't know why that is, then you're probably too young to know anyway. But either way, I had to think for a long time because I thought, right, well, I'm not going to use a payday name. The Red Room is a bit of a dodgy one. And I kept cycling through different things. I asked loads of people, what would you call the podcast if you were in my position? If you were called Red Archer Live and you wanted to do a podcast, what would your name be? And I'm pretty sure the Redcast was suggested by somebody. I'm not even sure whether I came up with it. I think it might have been an idea. But I also think it was something that was bouncing around the back of my head anyway, because it was super duper simple. And I think also Wildcat's podcast, if you know I Am Wildcat, the gaming YouTuber, he decided on his just being called The Wildcast. It's a very similar thing, you know, instead of going off for a magic, you know, super long or convoluted name, just put your name into the word podcast. It's a nice, simple, unbeatable thing. It's nice and easy. And it's, you know, a quick read. It stands out. And you think in your head, oh yeah, the Redcast. Nice and simple. So that was it. The podcast was made. The name was decided. After that, it was about getting the guests on. You know, who was I going to bring onto the show? And most importantly, who was I going to open up the show with? And as I said, I wanted to have some payday people, some non-payday people. And I think you can all understand my business-minded decision in that whoever the first guest was, it was a good idea to bring on a payday person, right? Because everyone who knows me for payday content, stepping into a podcast is not quite the payday content people expect, right? And so having something to bridge the gap, there's still a payday connection between the episode and my usual content, will bring more people over and let more people have a go. And I genuinely could not have picked a better person to come on for the first guest than Ian Russell. A man who at this point I'm quite proud to call my friend. He has been an absolute legend to me for the last couple of years. Being able to meet him in real life a couple of times, being able to interview him and then play Payday 2 with him live several times, and just the amount of contact we've had over these last couple of years has been absolutely surreal. For a character from Payday 2, one of my all-time favourite games, to know me on such a personal level is a very strange thing. And obviously I thought, well, I know him really well. He's someone I've spoken to before. He can help me. You know, we can have a good little chat and bring onto the show and open things up. And so I messaged him and said, hey, I'm looking to start a podcast. I think I mentioned to it before in the past anyway that I was considering it. So I think he kind of knew it was on the radar for me and I just hadn't quite decided what to do. But I messaged him and I said, right, I really want to open the show with you. I really want you to be my first guest. What do you think? And because he's a lovely bloke, the first thing he said was, of course, absolutely. Let me know when you need me. We'll get right into it. And so the Redcast episode 1, starring Ian Russell, was released on August the 24th, 2020, publicly on YouTube and Spotify. Which, side note, having my name on something on Spotify is still very strange to me. That's such a massive platform for music, and to see my name attached to a podcast on there is more than bizarre to me. But that episode released to quite a lot of attention. I mean, it's got now, at the point I'm looking, 2,428 views on YouTube, which, you know, compared to other podcasts, that's nothing at all. But to me, for someone who at the time, I'm not even sure how many subscribers I had. I think it was about 18-ish thousand, something like that. A lot of my Payday videos were mainly getting views because they were spreading to audiences beyond my subscriber base. A lot of people who watch my videos are not subscribed. I think it's more that YouTube's algorithm carries my content beyond my subscribers, which is great. I hope that continues. I really do. But for that amount of people to check out something non-Payday, even though it had a Payday guest, blew me away. Because I was really worried this would drop. It would get like 100 views. No one would really care. And I'd be like, well, you know what? I made the podcast. It didn't quite work out. Chalk it up to experience. But people really liked it as well. The like ratio to dislike ratio, the comments on it, and just the general messages and people talking to me about how much they enjoyed it, how much they wanted to see more, and all their Payday guests would like to see. Honestly, it was just so humbling to me, and it was such a great experience. I think really what was great about episode 1 with Ian, though, for me personally, was being able to chat to him about non-Payday things, because while he is a Payday guest, if you actually look at the content in the description, most of it has absolutely nothing to do with Payday 2. There's very little Payday 2 content in there. Because, honestly, we'd spoken about most Payday things by that point anyway. We'd already spoken about him getting the role of Locke. We'd already talked about him taking the role on in the live-action form and becoming Locke on screen for Offshore Payday, for Somewhere in Mexico. We'd treaded all over that ground before, and we played Payday 2 together. So, for me, I wanted to say, well, you know what? Here's a guy you've seen on my channel a few times, in a slightly different perspective. Here's him talking about his everyday life. Here's him talking about things beyond being Locke, even about his voice acting career in general. And to be honest, we discussed some pretty interesting things. Him talking about how he got into the role of acting just generally, and also talking about his One Voice Award nominations, which, side note, the only regret I have now, slight regret, I can't really call it a regret per se, but I really wish we'd recorded our episode after the One Voice Awards, because they happened about a week or so after we had our chat, after it went public anyway. And he won loads of them. He won Voiceover Artist of the Year, in the male category, that is, but Voiceover Artist of the Year. Like, that is no small feat. And I've said it to him personally, he should be super duper proud of that, and I know he no doubt is. But honestly, what an absolute honour, and what a well-deserved award for him, to be completely honest with you. But I really wish that we'd recorded the episode afterwards so we could have talked about that a bit more, because at the time of recording it, it was all kind of like a, oh, you know, it'd be cool if I won, but, you know, it's just cool to be nominated kind of thing. He is so humble. It is not even funny. I almost wonder sometimes if he doesn't quite grasp just how good he is at voice acting, because just being able to take on the role of Locke, just being that side character and then becoming one of the main voices of the game, being the guy talking you through every heist, that's not easy. That's not a role that a lot of voice actors could actually adapt to and do so well. And he did a cracking job, and he's done so many voice acting roles beyond that, and he's only been in the industry for less than a decade. He's done very, very well for himself, and I hope he's super duper proud of himself, because he really, really should be. Honestly, what a guy. But it was fun at the end of the episode to talk a bit about Payday 3, as a lot of you will have realised. Discussing Payday 3 became the final topic of the Payday episodes, because it was a nice thing to round off the podcast. You might go, oh, was it for watch time? I mean, it is, in one way, kind of a watch time-based thing, because if you know the Payday 3 stuff is coming towards the end, it encourages some people, fair, will skip to the end, they'll just go to listen to Payday 3 stuff, but I think to some people, it gave them a chance to listen to the stuff beyond Payday 3 and go, oh, let's listen to what else they're talking about, let's see what else they've got to say aside from Payday stuff. And I know that some people came into this not really sure what to expect and were pleasantly surprised. What they listened to, they thought was quite good, they enjoyed the conversation, they wanted to see more, and I'm glad I did things the way I did. I really, really am, because the connection that myself and Ian have is a connection no other Payday player or even Payday YouTuber can say. I know Ian Russell has spoken to past YouTubers in the past, like Beecroft and Connor Shaw and all that, but no one else can say that they met Ian in real life more than once, that he offered to buy them a drink. That's not me flexing, by the way. I know it sounds like me flexing, but it's me pointing out that the connection that we had was so special, and that's why I'm so glad he was the first person I chose to bring on, because honestly, I wouldn't have picked anyone else. He's a Payday person, which gets the Payday audience interested in trying something new for me. He's a good friend of mine, someone that I know quite well and was happy to talk to again. And just all around, I had a blast. I had an absolute blast talking to him. And it was also quite funny, him painstakingly listening to me try and do the intro for the podcast for the first time, because I had no idea what my intro was going to be. I wrote up the draft, which was actually pretty close to what I stayed with, to be honest with you. So I'm quite impressed by that, just personally. But he had to listen to me record it a couple of times. I had to go through it and kept getting caught on my words, etc. It wasn't until episode 6 that I started recording the intro separately to the actual main interview, which is something I should have done from the start. But just generally, he was so heartwarmingly lovely and positive and kind and funny and just brilliant about everything. So that was episode 1 with Ian Russell. One absolute gentleman, because honestly, like I said, who else could I pick to open the podcast with? I couldn't have picked anyone else. But that was episode 1. And after the strong reception, after the way everyone felt about the episode and all the comments and stuff, I thought, right, we're on to a corker here. Let's get another guest onto the show. Who's it going to be? And I started to have this idea in my head. I thought, well, if I want to have some Payday guests, but some non-Payday guests, why don't I try to roughly balance it out 50-50, and each other episode will be a non-Payday person. It's not a pattern I completely stuck with, not entirely, but it is one I pretty much tried to keep to for the majority of the show. And so episode 2, I brought on YouTuber number 1. A really, really lovely guy, and someone whose content I personally have enjoyed watching for years upon years. Honestly, he's someone whose YTP or YouTube poop content I have loved since I was in college, which I know is not the same as college in America. So this is like when I was 16-ish. I came across his first Schlock YTP, the Sherlock ones, which, honestly, the editing work that goes into that, it's funny, because I think at the time when I was watching those videos, I was still editing videos in Windows Movie Maker, which, for anyone who's used Windows Movie Maker, you know for a fact that editing software could not do very much. That's very, very bare-bones stuff. You can splice some clips, put a bit of music over things, but you can't really do much more than that. I mean, you only have one video and one audio track. Like, literally, you can't do much more than that. You've got to add sounds, and that's it. And so I don't think at that point I quite grasped how much editing went into these, but once I got Sony Vegas and started properly editing things for Payday 2, I realised, you know what? The effort he puts into these is far more than I could ever possibly imagine. And his work ethic, the amount of things he's put up, all the different YTPs of Disney films, of Sherlock episodes, of all stuff, everything in between, he's done a fantastic job. And so to chat to him a bit more about his experience with YouTube, how he started out, what he's gained from it, was nice. I think having two different YouTubers from different perspectives talking about how they've evolved was really cool. And it was also, I think, quite nice from fan to friend with him, being able to be like, I previously just looked up to his content, thought he was a great creator and loved his videos, and now I'm sat in a Discord call with him finding out about his own life. And that was a very, very strange transition for me, but one I welcomed, one I absolutely genuinely welcomed. It was really, really nice to sit down and enjoy that experience with him and just get to know him better. It's going to be a theme you're going to hear a lot when I'm talking about these episodes, but that was the main goal. As I said, it was to explore the world of entertainment, as the intro says, through the many, many forms it takes. Even as the bio says for the show, I mean, initially it just said join Troy in his all-new show, and I had to change that recently because obviously it wasn't all new anymore. But if you look in the bio now for the podcast, you'll see that it says it's all about exploring the world of entertainment and the many forms it takes. And, Payday 2 is just a piece of that. YouTube poops are just one form of YouTube content creation on the platform, and there are so many different types. I mean, you could list off the amount of types of YouTube content creation. You'd be here till the cows come home. You've got YouTube poops, you've got gaming, you've got vlogs, you've got music, you've got mukbang, ASMR. These are just the things I can name off the top of my head. There is so much more than that. So much more. And so just to get a bit of insight into something a bit different, a bit outside of my own perspective, was something that was very, very, very nice. Sitting down and chatting to someone that wasn't in the Payday field, and actually also that getting quite a fair response. If I bring up the views for that, which I haven't got in front of my face now, but if I look it up, we're at 1,100 on that. So really, even though it's a bit less than half of Ian Russell's views, for a non-Payday one, non-Payday content on my channel does not do very well. I think you've all noticed that. I'm still trying to find the occasional video I can upload that's non-Payday that people might care about, because obviously sometimes with Payday 2 content, you don't always have things to do every week. Sometimes the news is a bit dry, and sometimes you're not really sure what to do for a video idea, and I don't like leaving weekends blank. I like to upload something. And for instance, one weekend where I wasn't sure what to do, I did a review of the Marvel's Avengers game. Now I know that one had a lot of controversy and a lot of bad reviews, but that video, I think, only just recently passed 500 views. That, quite safely we can agree, tanked. And I worried, as I said, that podcast episodes would do this, but for number one's episode to do really well as a podcast, which, let's face it, would get less views than even a non-Payday video would, that really, really surprised me, and I was really happy, and I said that to him as well. I was like, I have to admit, I didn't know how well our video would do, because it's not a Payday thing, and I'm very glad to see that our audience, or my audience, I should say, gave it a chance. And I know he shouted out on his platform, which obviously helped a good bit, and I think a couple of people might have stayed around from him watching his episode. If so, hi. Thank you very much for doing so. I really appreciate it. But just, yeah, the evolution of him making his YouTube poops, how he's producing them, how his style's evolved, and even how he got his job with the Game Theorist. It was just very interesting to sit down and chat to him and get to know a bit more about him. But that was episode 2. Episode 2 of the Redcast with number 1. And episode 3, then following on from my pattern, I thought, okay, let's keep up the Payday theme. Let's bring on another Payday 2 guest. Who do I want to chat to next? Who is on my radar that I could talk to? None other than the man that started me off with these interviews, Damion Poitier. And I don't know whether he's listened to any other episodes beyond our own. I'm not even sure he's listened to our own episode back. I mean, that guy is ridiculously busy, the amount of work he has going on, which is great. I mean, the man deserves it. He is fantastic. I mean, he starred in some of my favourite Marvel films, which, just saying that, and it's funny because I literally rewatched Civil War with my mum recently, and when Damion comes up on screen and he's like threatening Black Widow, it's like, I've done a podcast episode with that guy, and that is like, I can't explain that feeling of seeing that guy on the screen on a $100 million budget movie and being like, I've spoken to him. That is bizarre. It's very, very strange. And as a lot of you know, I mean, I love Payday 2, but there are so many other things I'm interested in. A lot of you know my favourite game of all time is Life is Strange. That whole world I absolutely adore. More so the first couple of games, but that's another point. But the whole world of Marvel, of Doctor Who, of Star Wars, I have so many other interests beyond Payday. And so, once again with Damion, there were things we talked about already with Payday 2. How he got the role of change, how he felt exploring all these different live-action cutscenes, how his character evolved. What we hadn't spoken about a bit was the ending of Payday 2, because at the time of our interview, we chatted in September of 2018, which for those of you who can't quite remember dates and years of the Payday 2 fandom this is, that was a month before the White House released on PC, right before the ending, right before Bane's funeral and the offshore Payday cutscene. So Damion, in his devious little manner, messaged me after the show and said, let's chat when there's more things to discuss, and little did I know, he was hinting at something pretty damn big there. Obviously, I couldn't bring him onto the channel immediately after because we'd just spoken to him. It would have been a bit weird to be like, hey, it's been a month, but Chains is back. Let's do another interview. And I think because we both had different things, I was looking to bring on other Payday actors in the meantime and just chat to the people. I was like, right, Damion, I want to come back to at some point. He's someone I definitely want to chat to, but let's explore some other people first. And then, of course, when this podcast came along and I wanted more Payday guests, I thought, right, now's the time. Let's hit up Damion, let's get him back on the show, and let's chat to him. And what I really loved about this episode in particular was, once again, just like Ian, we talked about Payday 2 for a bit, but it went on far beyond that. At the time we made that episode, there were a lot of debates going on about the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as just the COVID crisis being in a massive spike, as it has been pretty much on and off the whole of 2020, as I've already said. But we even spent half an hour plus talking about Marvel films. I mean, that was an absolute blast, getting to know his opinions on Avengers Endgame, what he was looking forward to most out of all the future Marvel content. There's even an unseen clip I took out the recording that I thought would be better as a bonus clip, where we talked a bit about Chadwick Boseman's passing. That was I mean, we literally recorded that not long after Chadwick had passed away. I mean, he died at the end of April, and we recorded this in mid-September-ish, so it hadn't been that long. And as some of you might know, Chadwick Boseman's passing was something that, I mean, as did the rest of the world, really, I'm not alone in this, but shocked me. I was a massive fan of his work, and the way he brought Black Panther to life, so talking to Damion about that as well. There were so many different things that we explored, and I think really just being able to explore beyond Payday 2, but also, talk about the Payday 2's ending, talk about Payday 3. For him in particular, it was interesting because he has such a good working relationship with Overkill, with the developers there, that he knows about Payday 3 things already. As he said in the podcast episode, that he knows things about Payday 3 that are not public, which did not surprise me. I figured if anyone was going to know more, it would be Damion, because as I've said, this good working relationship. I really wish he'd been able to tell me more, but obviously I would never dream of putting him in a position where he would, expose things that shouldn't be public. But as he said himself, he's someone who doesn't really know when he can and can't talk about things that are private and can be public, etc. So, as he said, his mantra is just, wait until something is made public and going, hey, this is cool, I knew about this, or whatever, So, talking to him was a blast. And I think my personal highlight of that episode was the Marvel discussion, because to me, for a year where any other Marvel fans out there know that we Marvel fans this year, especially MCU fans, have had the biggest drought of content. I mean, we've had no new releases for the MCU this year. It looked like maybe we were going to get WandaVision for a hot minute. That didn't happen. That's coming out in January. Black Widow got delayed for a second time, which still makes me sad, but either way. But Damion Poitier, what a guy. What an absolute guy. I would like at some point to try and bring some of these people back, maybe do a big group episode, but Damion, definitely, man. I love that guy. He's so down to earth despite having roles in so many big things. And, who could say in their life they played Thanos in the Avengers? One man. That's one hell of a thing to have on your resume. That is one hell of a thing to have on your resume. Of course, that's not the only thing he's done, but you get the point. Let's move on now to episode 4, airing on October 5th, 2020, which was The Secrets of Doki Doki Blue Skies, featuring Sir Swampert. Now, this one to me was a very interesting one to make, and I think the reason for that is Sir Swampert as a name is not somebody that people really know. Let's be fair. I mean, I don't know whether San's listening to this, whether he supported any future podcast episodes, and honestly, as a guy, San is a lovely person. He's absolutely lovely, and we kept saying we're going to be playing some video games at some point and chatting and just getting to know each other a bit more, because chatting to him, that was great, honestly, because for me, that was at the time when I just started getting into Doki Doki Literature Club again, which, for those of you who don't know, is basically a horror anime dating sim type game. I can't say much more than that because it will literally spoil it. If you haven't listened to the episode, again, it's well worth playing the game before you get into it. But Sir Swampert, for those of you who don't know him by name, was the lead developer on Doki Doki Blue Skies, which was a mod that took away the horror elements of the game, but almost reinvented it into a normal dating sim type game, but with the same dark, depressing twists that Doki Doki Literature Club had. And just personally, as myself as a player, I was so excited to get into that game and give it a go and just see, because for a mod that rewrites the story, that's not official, it's not, made by the main developer, he has nothing to do with it, no involvement, doesn't even endorse the thing. It had a massive launch, 1 million people watching the reveal trailer, tons of people playing it, talking about it, the Discord server for it being massive, and myself, it was one of the only games I've ever played, or streamed I should say, and made a series out of, that got some actual decent attention, Over 1,000 views, as I've said, for non-payday stuff is very rare, but both the Doki Doki Literature Club initial stream, and I think episodes 1 and 4, the opening and final episodes of Blue Skies, have 1.5, 1.6 thousand views, which is no small feat, especially for live streams, let alone non-payday things. So there was a little sub-portion of my community that exploded with the Doki Doki stuff. I mean, my Discord channel had a Doki Doki channel. We made Doki Doki girl roles who supported their favourite girls, and people for ages had little jokey battles over who was the best girl. It was a wild experience, and if you were in my Discord server or just part of the community at that time, you'll know how wild that was. It was a great time. And so getting to know the guy behind that, the guy who developed this mod that revitalized my love of Doki Doki years after I played it, was really cool, because to me, reaching out to him and asking him to come on was the first kind of strange reaching out thing, because for number one, as I said, he was a fan of his work initially, but I tried to speak to him a bit before and tried to get to know him a bit better and be like, hey, I'm a YouTuber, how are you doing, blah blah blah. We had a few conversations with San, asked him a couple of questions about the mod, just generally as a player rather than as someone who was interested in talking to him. Which, that sounds bad, I wasn't interested in talking to him, but you get what I mean. I was I want someone to give me answers on how this bit of the game works. And I realised he was the lead dev and that he had, such a massive passion for it, which he obviously had to be the lead developer, and I thought, I wonder if for a non-payday episode we could chat about Doki Doki, you know, about the game itself, about him making Blue Skies. So I reached out to him and said, are you interested? And he immediately just went, hell yeah, I'm down for it. He's like, I've done a podcast before, but it was before Doki Doki Blue Skies launched. I've not done one since. Let's talk about it a bit more. And I was like, great. So we sat down, we had this conversation, and it was a great time. It was a really, really great time to chat to him and explore all these different bits of the game, the development, and get to know him better. And honestly, it was quite nice to kind of geek out with him for a bit, to talk about our love of Comic-Con, for one thing, which is something I'm more new to, and would have loved to have gone to several this year. But as we all know, for about the 50th time I've said during this episode, things have changed. We've not been able to do things like that. But Comic-Con, if you've never been to a comic convention, it's just something that you definitely need to do to tick off your bucket list. If there's anything in TV or film that you like that would show up at a comic convention, like a Marvel film or a TV show like Supernatural, The Walking Dead, or Doctor Who, or whatever it might be, if you're interested in any of that, please at some point in your life go to a Comic-Con, because they're such good times. Sometimes a bit expensive for some of the things like signatures and photo ops and stuff, but genuinely, for the whole experience, once COVID has died down, once people can hug again, or just be within 6 feet of each other, oh, what an experience it'll be. What an experience it will be. But chatting to him, San is a lovely guy, to Swampert, and I'm glad that people checked it out. You know, obviously it's not one of the most popular episodes, but it's still, like, to me, there was a good amount of people who were still interested giving it a go and saying, you know what, this was really interesting to listen to. There was some cool stuff there. And there is, like, literally, I think, a 10-minute-ish bonus clip about the development of Yuri and how she almost wasn't in Doki Doki Blue Skies. That, along with the clip I mentioned earlier of Damion talking about Chadwick Boseman, by the way, will both be on the Redcast Clips channel at some point. It's the channel I made to highlight the best moments and unseen footage from the show. I made it ages ago, but being able to run several channels is not my forte. I'm currently running the main channel and also having the stream archive and the Twitch streams and my uni work, so, you know, I'm trying my best, but I am going to be putting videos on there very soon, so keep an eye out for that. Moving on to mid-October, carrying on with our Payday Actor Every Other Week theme, we have got Hoxton this time for episode 5, that being the fantastic Pete Gold, who I'd spoken to about 6 months prior to this podcast episode in roughly, I think it was April-ish. I'm pretty sure it was 6 months before. But in April, around about of 2020, we sat down and had an interview, but it wasn't very long. It was for roughly 30-40 minutes, which was nowhere near as long as I'd have liked it to be. I would have liked it to have been between an hour and 2 hours, because up to that point, that was how long my past interviews had been. So, to be honest, having him on for only that short span of time was a bit sad, and I was a little bit upset about that, but not in a way that I was like, oh, you know, it's Pete's fault or whatever, you know, I wish he could make more time for me, but he's a busy guy, I understand that, but it was more that we didn't have enough time to delve into things better. We didn't have enough chance to dive into his voice acting, his experience with Hox and all that stuff, and get into some proper nitty-gritty detail, and so that's why I messaged him and I said, you know, I know I've spoken to you not all that long ago, but we didn't have enough time to get into things properly and in depth, and I think that there's definitely a lot more we could talk about in an episode of a podcast. We could have a nice chat and hang out and have a good time. And he was like, yeah. He said, let's do it. So we tried our best to find a time where we'd have a bit more time to work with, and literally the podcast is about as long as the episode that you listen to. Once again, there's another nice deleted clip from that where we're talking a bit about the Save the Arts campaign. So about people, especially in the UK, but also beyond, trying to save theatres and cinemas and trying to keep people in entertainment, because obviously COVID has impacted that quite heavily. But this episode was a bit of a turning point for me, because this was the first episode in which the guests recorded their own audio on their side, and I recorded my own on my own private side and had to overlap the two recordings and do a bit more in-detailed editing than I had up to that point. It's funny because Ian, Number One, and San were all using pretty high-quality microphones, and I think if I'd have asked any of them to record their end, they would have done, but it wasn't even a thought that crossed my mind. I figured the Discord call would be strong enough to, you know, make it sound as good as possible, and I think really it was because I was talking to Pete on Skype, because he didn't have Discord, that, you know, it was really beneficial to have his side of the recording, because it made him sound far clearer. And in the clip I'll be putting up on YouTube, the bonus clip I talked about with Save the Arts, he hadn't turned his microphone on yet, so you'll hear the Skype audio and you'll understand that really was not as good quality. But he was the guy who was also quite responsible for getting me to record the intro separately to the podcast episode. He said to me, well, why don't you just do the intro separately and stick it on at the start? And I thought, how have I not thought of this despite being a YouTuber for 6 years? You know, that isn't really a difficult thing to work out, so Pete, even though the stuff you said was very obvious, or should have been, I'm very grateful for the help you offered me. I truly am. That was very nice of you. But chatting to him again, like I said, breaking down all the different bits about his role as Hoxton, and also just generally voice acting and him getting into more of the audiobook type stuff was quite interesting. Him winning awards. Also his comedy songs. That was a really interesting thing to get into, you know, him doing the comedy albums, of which I haven't actually gone back and listened to all of them still, but I've heard a few of the songs on Spotify, and, you know, they're a bit old now, but they're also really, really funny. Like, when I first listened to one of them after he had the podcast episode, there was one in particular that had me literally in stitches laughing. So he's just a funny guy generally, I think. A really, really lovely bloke, and chatting to him about Hoxton and also about his comedy songs songs, his award wins, the Hoxton On Demand Twitter account, and then finally his thoughts on Payday 3 once again. Was a great time. It was a really good time, and I cannot thank Pete enough for coming onto the show. And now moving on to episode 6, the longest episode to date of the Redcast, and honestly one of my absolute favourites to record. Episode 6, the ultimate Doctor Who episode, featuring Doctor Who YouTuber CrispyPro. Now, you know how I said with episode 4, I had to actually reach out and do something I hadn't done before, in which contacting someone who was outside of my field of contact and saying, I'd like you to be on my podcast, would you be interested? That was already enough of a step for me, but I've never had to email somebody before and say, hey, I'm doing a podcast, would you like to check it out? Someone who had no idea who I was, because San, when we had our interview, he'd seen me do the Doki Doki live streams, you know, we'd spoken a bit, I got into contact with him because of the podcast, and got to know him a bit around that and around the Doki Doki content, but for CrispyPro, that guy had no idea who I was until I said, hey, podcast, interested? And he was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Because, side note, he's a lovely guy, but I'd started watching his content a few-ish months before I emailed him. This year in general for me has been a bit of a Doctor Who renaissance, because I've been a fan of that show since I was 7, but more recent years, as you'll have heard during the Doctor Who episode, I kind of fell out of love with the show a little bit. Not that I disliked it, but just wasn't as keen on the new eras as much, but with lockdown happening and then loads of old episodes being rewatched as a whole global community, it got me really back into the show. You know, I've really got back into my Doctor Who side of my fandom and been buying loads of Doctor Who coats and outfits and stuff. It's actually inspired my fashion sense a little bit, so that's kind of nice to have a bit more fashion sense because of Doctor Who. But it really, really did like kind of reinvent my love of the show, and it was one of the reasons I came across more Doctor Who YouTube content. There are great YouTubers out there beyond CrispyPro, like Ace Creeper, Harry's Moving Media. There are some really cool creators out there, and who knows, maybe I'll bring on another one for another episode at some point. But chatting to Crispy about his love of Doctor Who, his experience of meeting some of the Doctor Who cast, you know, comparing it to mine. I mean, he's met Peter Capaldi, that is like the ultimate dream for me. And then I met John Barrowman, which to him was like massive and mental. And I think what was also quite nice about that at the time was that we had identical sub counts. I think we were both at like 20.1 thousand subscribers or something at the time we recorded it. Like, we had very similar sub counts. We both did weekly videos. I think we're both of a similar age. I don't know how old he is, but I get the impression he's about the same age as me. So, you know, we're very similar people doing different things. And yet we both have a massive love of Doctor Who. And I think to break that down and talk about that show, and really, even though the idea of the show is to get to know a person behind what they do, just being able to spend a good bit of time chatting about the show was also very, very nice for me. That episode, though, I've got to tell you, that was a beast to edit. Because, as from this point onwards, for most of the episodes was the case, Crispy, again, like Pete, recorded his audio alongside mine. So we both had our own individual audio tracks and had to combine them in the edit, which means, you know, some things got cut out, left on the cutting room floor, there were bonus clips, etc. And an issue that I didn't actually mention during Pete Gold's run, but one that I had in his run, as well as Crispy's, and all the others, to be honest. I don't know why, I've been trying to fix this, but I don't know what the issue is, but when you sync up the two audio tracks together at the beginning, by the end of the episode, we're talking over each other. The audio tracks run out of sync, and it's like Crispy's heard my stuff before I've even said it by the end of it, and so I've constantly got to be resyncing the audio, making sure it fits perfectly, and just generally doing the actual editing that I do to these podcast episodes to make them sound good. That took me 2 days. It was a long ass time, guys. It took me a while, which I'm not saying for pity or to be like, oh wow, I'm so proud of you. I mean, I'm just putting out that one took a hell of a long time to edit, but I think what was nice about that, what was comforting for me, was it was just listening to two people nerd out about their favourite show. I've actually, personally, it's the only episode of the Redcast which, post-editing, I've actually gone back and listened to in full, just because it was nice to hear about people, you know, laughing about a show that they both love. I think there was something quite nice to that. But also, I think, as we can tell, it's just a general pattern of me liking Doctor Who things, so I'm not really surprised that was the one I went back to. But yeah, for me, that was personally one of my favourite episodes to record. So Crispy, if you happen to be watching this, thank you so much for being on the show. You're an absolute legend, and I really, really do appreciate it. It's been an absolute blast to have you on. And I'm glad I've just got another contact in the YouTube world and the Doctor Who scene that I can talk to now. It's nice to know more people in different fields of the YouTube world. But we're 2/3 the way through the guests, and so as we draw towards the end of the season, we've now got episode 7 with Ilia Volok. Now this one, alongside Eric Eterbari, were two of the biggest ones I landed on this show. Two of the biggest names, mainly because they were people I hadn't spoken to before. Ilia and Eric were the only two Payday 2 actors that I brought onto the show who I hadn't spoken to before their podcast interview. As I'll talk about with Eric, I did have some text correspondence with him over the years, but with Ilia, I had absolutely nothing. And I've got to give all the credit in the world to Ian Russell, because without him, this episode would not have happened. So Ian, just like being on the first episode, really, for everything else you've done, thank you so much, mate. I really do appreciate it. But Ian will not mind me telling everyone this, that he literally popped up to me and said, are you looking for more Payday 2 podcast guests? I was like, yep, looking to get all people in contact. Why? You know, if you got a reason for asking? He was like, well, actually, yeah, because I've got contact details for Ilia Volok, who plays Vlad. Would you like them? And I was like, yes, I would. Please do. So he said, right, write up something you want me to send to him. I'll send him an email. I've got his details, and I'll let you know if he responds. So I wrote out something for him to send. And within a couple of days, Ilia had come back and said, yeah, set us up, get us connected, and let's have a chat. Which to me, I was like, oh my god, I'm going to be talking to Vlad. And the response, side note, on Twitter to that, I mean, my tweets very rarely get more than like 3 or 4 likes. That one exploded. People got very excited for me, the fact that I have Vlad on the show. And really, it was such a good time to bring him on. I got to see Ilia speaking while he was talking me through things. It was quite nice to see, you know, the looks in his face and the smiles when he was talking about certain things. In particular, when we were talking about Diary of a Madman, his one-man play. Which, side note, as a concept, him talking about it was thoroughly interesting. And I said to him during the podcast, it was kind of like Fleabag, which was a big play in the UK that became a TV show. You know, being able to do a one-man play where you're the only thing that people have eyes on. You know, some sound effects, maybe a few props, whatever, but people don't come for that. They come for the actors. They come to be entertained, to be sucked up into stories they've never seen before. And for someone to do what Ilia's done, for anyone to do what Ilia's done, to do a one-man show and to take it everywhere and do hundreds of shows is no small feat. And I think when he realised that I actually had some serious interest in the stuff beyond Payday, because I think probably what he expected when he came to the show was that I was just going to be like, Payday this, Payday that, whatever, nothing else beyond that. I think what was really nice for me was that when he realised I was asking about things beyond Payday 2, the look on his face, the smile was lovely. I mean, don't get me wrong, he wasn't like mad to talk about Payday. I mean, he was loving those discussions anyway, and it was really nice, I think, for him to just explore the role and sum it all up over time. But you could tell that he had that different kind of like glint in his eye, where he was like, oh, this guy really wants to know about things that I've done, you know, other roles. And I don't think for a lot of actors they get that opportunity in interviews, and that's why I said it for this show. I don't want people to just be interviewed on the thing that they're known for, or the thing that I'm bringing them on for, because there's so much more to a person than the one role they've done. But I think for him, with all the roles he's been in, being able to discuss some of the other ones was quite nice for him. At least that's the impression I got. So just generally being able to chat to Ilia about all of his different roles, appearing in everything. I mean, like I said in the show, if you look at his YouTube channel, you will see just how much he's been in. And it is phenomenal. I mean, he's been in Indiana Jones, he's been in Gemini Man, he's been in Friends, and then Payday 2 is literally just a chunk of that. It's just a little tiny piece of a massive career spanning years upon years. It is genuinely very, very cool to see him in it. And knowing he was in Supernatural for an episode was also quite weird, because I'm now going to start watching that show myself. I've seen a couple of episodes. I mean, I myself had seen it casually throughout the years, and I've seen the season finale, the last ever episode, because my mum was a massive fan, and I kind of followed the show loosely. But I haven't seen the episode that he was in its full entirety. I only saw the clip that he posts on his channel. So when I get to that episode, that's going to be very interesting to see him going toe-to-toe with Sam and Dean, so I'm looking forward to that. But Ilia is a great guy. He's a lovely, lovely guy, and I really enjoy chatting to him, and I really hope at some point we get to connect again. I really do, because he was a lovely bloke, an absolutely lovely bloke. But the next episode, episode 8, is where I broke my little pattern. I didn't have a non-Payday person this time. It was kind of somewhere in between. They weren't a Payday actor, but they were still involved with Payday 2. It was Payday 2's lead composer, Gustavo Coutinho, and let me just say, I'm quite glad now that I actually say his name properly, because apparently I wasn't getting it anywhere near right, calling it Coutinho. What was funny about getting him on board and getting him on the podcast was I wanted him on it for a while. I wanted to bring him on and ask him about it, and Gustavo, to me, what I found lovely was that he has already said he's been watching my content for a while, probably because I became an Overkill partner. That probably put me on his radar a bit more. But it was when he said to me on Twitter at one point that he watched some on Payday content and even tried some of the stuff that wasn't, like the Avengers video I mentioned earlier. You know, we know that tanked, so that did not get many views, but he was one of the people who watched it, which to me, I was like, you watched that video? Really? Like, to me, I was blessed to know that he'd taken an interest in that, and I thought it was absolutely lovely. I thought, what a lovely guy to be so interested in the content I put out that he'll just watch whatever I'm doing. I mean, obviously he's not seen every single video, but talking to the person who's had to fill in Simon Vickland's shoes, who's had to take over of such a massive role, such an important role for Payday 2, finding out what it was like for him and getting to know him a bit better, I knew there was something good there. And making that episode proved it to me. He was so interesting to talk to. To get a grasp of how he started off in the music world and the things he likes about composing music was very, very interesting. And also to me as just a musical person, because I love playing piano. I don't play it as much as I used to. And I mean, personally, I would love to be able to write my own songs like properly, but I don't think it's something I'd ever be properly good at. But listening to him talk about it, that was good. Listening to me sing, less so. That was a laugh. What's funny is I did cut out a good bit of that because there was lots of bits of me singing in the background, and for a podcast I didn't want it all to be secondhand audio. But I will tell you that he listened to a good portion of that video of me singing. A good portion. I mean, it's like 14 minutes long. I think he must have listened to at least 5 or 6 minutes of it, and then went, right, I'll listen to the rest of it later. But the way he responded to it, I was very, very surprised. Either way, Gustavo, a lovely, lovely, lovely guy. And I think being able to add to the portfolio that I spoke to a musician, a composer for the show, was really good. And I'm glad that he was the first person that I brought on in the music world, because he was just such a lovely guy. And we had it arranged for so long. He popped up in the Discord server when someone mentioned his name, and he was chatting along. And we'd already at that point discussed a bit about him coming on the podcast. And he was like, hey, I'd love to be a guest. I think I asked him, to be honest, around the time that we started the show, that Ian was the first guest. I said, at some point I'd love to have you on. And he went, that's great. Bit busy at the minute, but in a couple months' time, I'd love to join you. And so when he popped up in this Discord server and started chatting to us in my server, which was weird, I sent him a DM on the sly and kind of went, hey, just as a reminder, if you fancy being on that podcast, the offer is still open. And he went, right, let's book a date. What have you got? And I was like, here are all the dates. And he was like, wow, okay, this date. I was like, cool. So I nailed him down for episode 8. And that was a bit in advance. I think it was around the time I filmed episode 5 with Pete Gold. I think it was around the point where I decided with Gustavo he was going to come on. So that was great. It also felt very good just professionally to have names booked in advance. That was great. And was also one of the reasons that the episodes were every 2 weeks. I mean, to me, the reason the episodes were every 2 weeks started off firstly to be making sure I could get enough guests on. If I did them weekly, I didn't think I'd be able to spin it around fast enough and get enough people on at a quick enough speed. And also, I'm very glad it was every 2 weeks in hindsight, because as I've said, especially getting towards the end of the show, from about episode 5-ish onwards, editing them has been a nightmare. I've been very grateful to the episodes with Ilia and Eric, because only I recorded the call. They didn't have professional mics set up. Point being, with those episodes, when you're not putting together two different sides of a call and you're just snipping out bits of audio and making things sound better, it's a lot easier to edit. But for Pete's, for Crispy's, and for Gustavo's, all three of those, the editing they took was so monumental that I was so thankful that the next week I didn't have to do the exact same thing again. It was good to have a week off in between for each of those. That really meant the world to me, and I'm glad I went with that pattern. I'm glad I went with just every 2 weeks rather than every week, because beyond that would have become too much for me amongst everything else I had to do with YouTube and university work and everything else. But that was episode 8 with Gustavo Coutinho. What a guy. An absolutely lovely guy. I'm glad that we finally got to sit down and chat together, because we'd had that correspondence and discussed about being on the show for quite a while, so to see it become a reality was a blast. But then we come to episode 9. I know, the final episode of the show. The final main interview of season 1. Eric Eterbari, the face of Payday 2, quite literally. If you've talked about the live action things for Payday 2, look at it further than Eric, the face of Dallas, the leading man. To me, landing him was the biggest accomplishment of this show. Honestly, bringing on everyone else, returning guests, and even Ilia Volok was a massive honour. And I am so grateful for everyone who came onto this show, as I will talk about in a bit. But for me, landing the guy that I have been so mesmerised by as an actor for so long, for every time a Payday 2 live action thing came out, if Eric was in it, I was like, right, this is going to be great. Dallas is in it. Eric kills the scene he's in every time. He leads it. He's got such a commanding presence. He plays Dallas fantastically, which I think is even better by the fact that he isn't the voice. For someone, a different person to play the character that you hear in game on a live action trailer is already a bit jarring, really. And if they don't do it well, then you're immediately like, well, you're not Dallas. You're not the Dallas I know. So what? Why are you here? But Eric has this commanding presence that, I think really, as one of the only characters in video games, I think Dallas and Simon have a great balance. Simon Kerr does a great voice for Dallas, but I think Eric Eterbari does the live action stuff really good. I don't think you could top him. I think if either of those people swapped roles or tried to take on each other's roles, it would be a bit strange. I think they're both good where they're suited, and I think that their chemistry, they present Dallas in different ways, but in the same kind of vein, they still present the same character, and I think it's very well done. But for Eric, I wanted him on the show from the get-go. I was like, if I can get Eric Eterbari on the podcast, then that's a success. That is like, I've made a crowning glory in the Payday world with this podcast. But what was funny with setting up with him was I originally asked him to come on for an interview for the channel, in the way that I'd spoken to Ian, to Damion, to Georgia, to Pete. I remember at the time he said that he was interested in doing that, but he held off on actually fully accepting it because he thought, I'd rather know what's going on with Payday 3, and I hope he doesn't mind me telling this, I'm sure he won't, but he said, I'd rather know where we stand with Payday 3 first, and we could talk about that in a bit more of a solid matter, then we can have a proper interview at that point. I was like, okay, cool, sounds good to me. And that was, I believe, at the start of 2020. It was around about that point. And so, when I was sent this podcast, I thought, if I ask Eric, he's probably still going to be in a similar vein. Payday 3 has not really had a lot more information. He probably won't agree. But I thought, you know what, I'll message him anyway. And I said, I know you said, you're not really sure until we get more Payday 3 info, but I'm doing a podcast. If you're interested, give me a shout, and I'll invite you on. We can have a chat. And to my surprise, he just went, yeah, I'm going to go shoot some Narcos episodes, and I'll be back on we can call. And I was like, what? Okay, cool. It was a shock response to me. I did not think he'd say yes so easily, but he just went, yeah, I'm down, which I thought was lovely, because obviously he'd helped me with some stuff before on YouTube. Him, Damion, Pete, and Ian have all been great with my trailer edits for Payday 2, for Avengers, and for Star Wars. That's been fantastic. It truly, truly has. And I hope that at some point I do another one of those, maybe for Black Widow or something. I don't know. Eric, to me, on the down low, when he's not on the screen, is such a lovely, down-to-earth guy. I'm not saying that isn't how I expect him to be, but him chatting about, how he loves being in little small indie projects for films. As long as he's interested in the character, he'll sign up for whatever. He doesn't really care. I think that is fascinating. But I think, to me, the best moment of that episode has got to be talking about the Payday movie potential, about whether or not Payday 2 should get either some more live-action episodes or to do a film, because it was like something had just kicked off in his head, because he went off on this massive chat about, the fans need to back it. I really want a Payday movie. That's why I signed on to this. I want to see a Payday film. I want to see this happen. I want to be able to push a Payday movie. And he went off on this massive tangent, and not in a bad way. It was genuinely that he got so passionate about it and was able to spend a good solid 10 plus minutes being like, you know what? It's down to the fans. They've got to push these things. They've got to make it very clear, just like with Payday 3. They've got to let Overkill know that they want to see this happen. And if they do, they can't ignore it, which is completely true. I stand by that. I would still firmly think that a Payday film would be absolutely spectacular. So yeah, talking about that with Eric has got to be the highlight of that episode, because it was just so cool to see the way he lit up about it and talked all about, what he wants to see in a film, and, his future of his character, the future of Dallas was really insightful. It was really, really good to get to talk to him about that. And then we come to episode 10, which you're listening to right now, or hopefully still listening to if you're an hour in and haven't got tired of listening to my voice yet, which you may have done, and if you have, then fair enough. Honestly, looking back on this series, it's been a very, very strange experience. I talked about this on Twitter just before recording this episode, but it's been very strange for me to have this idea that I've had in the back of my head for so long of, doing this podcast show, having different people on each time, talking to them about their interests, their work, their famous roles, and the other things they've done. Every couple of weeks, every new episode have something new and interesting to talk about, to not fall back, to not, give up or be like, oh, I'm running out of people to talk to actually have a serious show and be super proud of at the tail end of it is something that's very, very bizarre to me. So to everybody that came on, to Ian Russell, to Number One, to Damion Poitier, to Swampert, Pete Gold, CrispyPro, Ilia Volok, Gustavo, Eric Eterbari, thank you, all 9 of you. Seriously, if any of you are listening to this, thank you for coming onto the show. It's been an absolute blast. To everyone who's still listening now, who checked out the show, whether you jumped in episode 1, or, hell, maybe this is the first episode you're listening to. If so, bit of a weird way to listen to the shows, but you know what? We all watch things in different ways sometimes. So either way, regardless of how much of the show you've listened to or watched on whatever platform it might be, thank you all so much. And to close it off, I would like to just say that for Season 2, I'm hoping that we can pull off something exactly the same again. I want to get another bout of 10 episodes. I want to be able to try and mix up some Payday and non-Payday people. And I want to have just a good time chatting to different people. Maybe some new people and maybe some returning people. I will say I've got a Payday 2 guest on I've spoken to before who has not yet appeared on the show, which kind of makes obvious as to who it would be. I've got a Payday 2 YouTuber confirmed to be coming on. And I'm also thinking about a few non-Payday episodes. There's some people I want to try and reach out to. Not sure how well they'll work, but we'll see if I manage to get them on. But I'm also thinking about potentially doing an episode with my personal Xbox friend group, because they've talked about for a while about joking about being on the podcast, and I went, well, is it a joke? Do you actually want to be on it? And I think actually it's a podcast episode talking to my friends and you all getting to see the relationship I have with people off of YouTube might be a bit of a laugh. So, I'll be interested to see what you guys think about that. But either way, I'm looking forward to bringing on more people and just being able to bring out something new and interesting in 2021. I did originally say it'll be back at the start of 2021. I'm now not too sure whether that will stand to be true. All I will say is follow me on my social medias, on Twitter, on Instagram, keep in touch with YouTube and Discord. I'll let people know when I decide on the time. Personally, that's because those of you following my YouTube work know I'm currently doing a teaching placement, and so that kicks back up in February. I haven't been doing it for a year. My degree works very strange, but that'll be firing back up in February. And what I don't want to do is start the podcast up again in January and then find 2 or 3 episodes in that I can't keep up with the work anymore and I have to pause the podcast. I would rather start it when I know I can do the 10 episodes back to back to back to back to back and finish them off. Maybe I'll record a few episodes during the teaching placement and then just make them all a few months later. Who knows? But look out for them. They will be out in 2021. I'm hoping by the latest we'll start at late spring, start of summer. Looking back on this, like I said, there are different reasons why I've loved every single episode, and it could have been quite easy for me to have just said, I loved every single episode of the show, despite there being ones where maybe I didn't have as much fun or, got a bit bored. Genuinely, talking to every single one of these people gave me a really interesting perspective, an interesting time to talk to people, whether I'd spoken to them before or not. There was some really good stuff there. But that brings an end to Season 1 of the Redcast. So thank you all, as I've said, once again, for listening throughout this show. It's been an absolute blast, and I cannot thank you all enough. If you have been enjoying the show, make sure you keep in touch with the podcast, follow it on your favourite podcast platforms, and if you are following on YouTube, like the podcast, subscribe, and leave your featured review in the comment section of the YouTube version, or on the review section of any of the other platforms. I know you can review podcasts on other platforms like Apple. Leave a review on there. I'll have a look through those and see if there's any there that I'd like to talk about as well. Thank you all so much for listening, and once again, thank you to my patrons supporting this podcast and my channel in general. As I said at the start of the episode, if you're looking forward to more early access to Season 2, if you maybe like to join the group to get early access when the season returns, then you know where to go. That's www.patreon.com/RedArcherLive. As I've said, I'll inform everyone on socials as to when the next episode will begin, when Season 2 will kick off. Another 10 episodes at some point in 2021. But until then, thank you all so much for listening. I hope you all have had a very lovely Christmas by the time you'll hear this. Publicly, it will be the 28th of December. For patrons, it'll be the 26th. So I hope you've had a lovely Christmas. All of you, I really do. And I hope you have a fantastic new year. I think for all of us, we want 2021 to be a little bit better, you know, not housebound for one thing. That'll be nice. But I will thank 2020 for giving me things like the motivation to make this podcast. You know, while we've had a bad year, it's nice to look at silver linings, I think, and to look at the things that came out of the despair or the sadness or whatever it was that made us happy. And for me, this podcast was top of it. This was the cherry on the cake. So thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you all again in 2021. Until then, thank you all very much for listening. I've been Red Archer Live, also known as Troy, and thanks for listening to the Redcast. See you all in 2021.